Good morning. My name's Nick, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about my Hammer C341. I've had it for about 6 months now, and specifically I'm going to talk about the rip fence, the good, the bad, the ugly, and potentially a workaround or a solution to some of the limitations. So here we go. So the first thing that we got to talk about, and I mentioned this in my previous video about this machine, is that one of the differences between the C331 and the C341 is the length of the outfeed table on the joiner. And so what you have here is you have a split rail for where the rip fence attaches. So here's the table saw side of the rail, and then here is the joiner planer side of the rail. And from my understanding, the difference between this and the C331 is the 31 has a shorter outfeed table and it has one continuous rail that goes across. But that apparently, according to the internet, causes problems because it doesn't actually firmly attach here, because it swings down when the joiner table comes up. And so it's kind of, I guess there's some play in the fence there. So the C341 does not have that problem. However, what I realize is it does have another problem, which is it comes with two fences. One is the joiner fence here, which has a lot of play in it. It's fine for a joiner fence. I wouldn't use it as a rip fence for the table saw. I don't think that's really what it's intended for on this particular machine anyway. And if you look at kind of how it relates to the saw blade, you'd see that it really doesn't have a lot of infeed length. So if you were trying to use it as a rip fence, you'd have very little of the fence before the blade, which obviously is not ideal. So I'm going to just basically exclude the joiner planer fence from my discussion about ripping on the table saw. So the fence that comes with the 41 is this piece of equipment, which is, sort of a roughly like a standard, American style rip fence. Honestly, Hammer, Felder, if you're listening, this thing, you could do a lot better. And I think, plenty of people have said that for the cost of this machine, for what it's intended to do, this fence really is just not adequate. I mean, it works. And I'll be honest, in my 6 months, I have not really run into a huge problem with the fence, but I haven't done a lot of ripping. Accuracy-wise, it's not too bad. I mean, there's not a lot of play in it from side to side. The clamping is a little bit less excellent than desirable, but it's okay. My big concern about this fence is the length of the rail. And so, the rail is adjustable front and back. You can slide it forward, and there's certain times when you want to slide it forward ahead of the blade. You can use it as kind of a guide when you're also using the sliding table. Or you can slide it kind of this position, the normal ripping position, in which case you've got, I don't know, 10 or 12 inches ahead of the blade in feed, and then you've got, let's call it 8 or 10 inches behind the blade out feed. It's okay. And again, I have not had significant issues, but then again, I really haven't been ripping a lot. I would like to have a longer fence. And I think that, frankly, it's just Hammer. It's just cutting a longer piece of extrusion, right? That's a super easy fix, even if nothing else stayed the same. So the other issue that you've got is that, so this fence will cut to approximately 11 inches on this rail. If you want to cut wider than 11 inches, you've got to move the fence and you got to put it on the rail that's on the outfeed side of the joiner table. And then you can get, up to, 30 or, according to this, probably 36 inches, something like that, of width. But here's the problem. That rail is really too short for that. I mean, when you look at it now, you'll see that the rail doesn't go to the end of the blade. So as you're pushing a piece through it, you're going to run out of fence before the material comes out of contact with the blade, which is totally not okay. Now you could push this thing forward a little bit. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could probably push it forward another couple inches, but come on. I mean, that is not, clearly not how that piece of equipment's meant to be used. And even then, you would really only be getting, an inch past the blade. It's just not, that is not acceptable. So I've come up with what I believe is going to be a solution for this. I mean, I don't think I should have to come up with a solution for this, but overall, I'm happy with the machinery. It's a great piece of machinery. This is just the limitation, one of the limitations that it has. So I had ordered a second fence from Felder. It's a longer fence. When I ordered it, I believed that this fence would fit the hammer machine. It does not. But you can see in comparison to the two that this other fence is a much longer, taller, and somewhat heavier duty fence. I mean, you can see that it's, it is at least probably 16 inches longer than the other fence. Just for people who are curious, the part number, it's part number 600-101. So I'm gonna, say one more thing about it before I talk about what I'm gonna do. And again, Felder, if you guys are listening, really, please, you could just really fix this problem. So when you look at these two extrusions side by side, there is no reason why that other fence can't fit onto this hammer machine. I mean, the difference in the way that the extrusions are made is a few, 5 millimeters, 4 millimeters, something like that. It's just clear that Felder doesn't want this fence to fit to this machine. So my recommendation personally is Felder, you should either offer a longer fence that fits hammer machines or provide a longer fence, or you should change the way that this is set up and have this extension rail be able to fit it. It's a super easy engineering fix. So with all that said, a bit of criticism, although I gotta say I really like the machine, and to be clear, for what I've been doing so far on the machine, I haven't run into huge issues, but I personally think that I would like to have and need a longer fence for this, particularly if I'm gonna cut anything wider than 11 inches. So I've come up with a way that I think will work to be able to use this extension fence. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about how I'm gonna do it, and I'll show the build if it works properly. So looking at this longer Felder rip fence, the basic reason that it won't mount is that the opening of the channel is higher than the mounting for the steel bar that is what attaches the extrusion. So, you can see that the threaded rod and the drift pin that hold the steel bar in place are below the opening of the notch. So I considered taking the extrusion to a machine shop and having them nip the bottom of that channel so that it would slide over. But part of the reason I decided not to do that is that the top of the channel, and again, is this coincidence or is it not coincidence? I mean, you decide, but so the top of the channel just barely misses the top of the rip fence sort of mounting assembly there. So as you tighten it, it's gonna have a tendency to pull it ever so slightly out of square to the table, or at least that was my belief. And if you look at the way that steel bar is mounted, there's really no way to alter it, to make it higher. If you were to mount a block above this, it would be too high. So there's just really no way to alter that piece to make it work properly. So what I'm gonna do, I've decided on, I'm gonna try a different approach, is I'm gonna fabricate a new steel bar, which I've already got. It's a piece of 12-inch long, 3/4 by 3/8 steel, 2 pieces of 4-inch aluminum, they're 3/4 by 1.5 inches, some M4 screws, that's a 6 millimeter drift pin, and I'm gonna reuse the 8 millimeter tightening knob. So what I'm essentially gonna do is I'm gonna mount these aluminum blocks front and back a little bit higher than the existing assembly. I'm going to drill through them, and I'm going to create basically two alternative locations for the tightening knob and the drift pin. Now, there is a chance, so I'm going to mount the tightening knob on the front here. There is a chance that when I do that, it's going to have a tendency to pull the fence a little bit out of square if I'm only having a drift pin in the back here. So if that happens, then what I'll simply do is just mount two mounting knobs, one in the front and one in the rear. All these parts are things, so the metals I got off McMaster Car, the drift pin I got out of McMaster Car, M4 screws, you know, off of Amazon, probably 30 bucks in parts. So I'm gonna set to machining these and we'll see if it works out. Since I last taped the clip previous to this, I've drilled the holes for the mounting screws as well as the mounting knob, and I've also changed my mind. So I was going to put the mounting knob towards the front or the far side of the fence mounting assembly there, but I'm going to put it in the back because even though you know, with only one knob, it may have a tendency to pull it a little bit. The pushing of the material against the rip fence is going to tend to, you know, push the rip fence against the mounting block, which is what I want. And I can still always mount two screws if I need to, but I'm going to try it this way first. So what I've done is I've clamped everything down into exactly the position I want it, and I'm going to use the mounting block that I've made, the aluminum block, as the drilling template to mount the to drill the holes for the M4 screws that are going to mount it. I think, you know, I thought about it and decided that was the most accurate way to do it. So here we go. Here's a quick view of the inside of the rip fence mounting assembly. So I've got the aluminum block now mounted to it with two M4 screws, lock washers and nuts on the inside. That's with the side plate taken off, and hopefully that'll do it. This is the completed build, so it worked out. I did abandon the idea of using a drift pin for one of the two sides, which is how the factory fence is set up. It has one threaded rod and one drift pin, but the threaded rod on the factory setup goes through the center, and so it pulls the fence against the mounting assembly tightly, and in this case it just needed two threaded rods in order to make it pull against the fence tightly. So it works really well, actually, not gonna lie. I got a M8 knob and an M8 by 125 or 130 millimeter bolt off of Amazon. So it does the trick. Loosen it up, slides back and forth nicely. When it's tightened, it has really very little play, just a little bit, but you know, pretty reasonable amount of play at this end. And you know, now I've got a longer fence, so I'm pretty happy with it. Just taking the rail off for a second so you can see kind of the finished product. So that's it. 12-inch steel bar, 2 threaded rods, 2 aluminum mounting blocks, some M4 by 30 screws. Yeah, pretty simple and easy to take off. And of course, I'll save the factory fence and I can just simply dismount this longer steel bar, pull one of the rods out, and go back to using it the way that it comes from the factory if I need to. So that's it for this video. I'm not recommending that everybody rush out and go spend $200 on the Felder longer rail and do this modification to their saw. I wish I hadn't had to do this, or I wish I could have just bought a piece. But, I have this expensive machine in my basement, and I put a lot of time, effort, and money into getting it down here. I plan on having this machine for the rest of my life, and I wanted to have a longer fence for it. So this was a solution, not necessarily saying it's the best solution. I do think I've seen, I think, 1 or 2 videos where people out there change the rails and then, can mount like a Biesemeyer fence or something like that. I'm sure there's a lot of other ways to do this, but this is a way. And if you choose to do it, good luck with it. I mean, I will say again, for any criticism I have of Hammer and Felder for not having a better fence and for not having parts that you can order for it, it's still a great machine. And I don't regret buying it. Any machine you buy is going to have some limitations. And this is one, but it's something that is able to be fixed. So good luck.